The train from Toronto slowed as it approached the small Whitby station, its brakes hissing in the cold morning air. A light mist clung to the fields, and the passengers, stepping down from the platform, had no idea that one of their fellow travelers was about to vanish from ordinary life. 24-year-old Jack McLeod adjusted his worn duffel bag, glanced once at the station clock, and walked toward a black sedan, waiting with its engine running. The driver gave no greeting. He only asked Jack's name, nodded, and gestured for him to get in. Moments later, the car turned off the main road and disappeared into the woods near Lake Ontario, heading toward a place few Canadians would ever know existed. It was called Camp X. Jack had been a history teacher before the war, athletic and soft-spoken, but the man who recruited him in Ottawa saw something uncommon in him. The recruiter introduced himself only as Reynolds. He carried no uniform, no insignia, just the quiet authority of someone who lived behind locked doors. Reynolds asked Jack strange questions during the interview. Could he blend into a crowd? Could he lie convincingly? Could he take a life if he had no other choice? Jack answered with honesty, even when the truth made his stomach twist. A week later, an unsigned letter arrived, telling him to pack light and expect no recognition for whatever service might follow. He understood what that meant. If he failed, no one would come looking. The sedan emerged from the trees onto a clearing surrounded by watchtowers and barbed wire. Jack stepped out and inhaled the cold wind blowing off the lake. Several men in civilian jackets walked past him, all moving quickly, all silent. A British officer greeted him with a firm handshake and a rough accent. "Welcome to Special Training School 103, he said. But the world knows it, if at all, as Camp X. From this moment forward, you will not speak of this place to anyone outside these fences." Jack followed him down a muddy path toward a cluster of wooden barracks and low buildings painted in drab green. The air smelled of damp soil, fuel, and the sharp tang of cordite. He heard gunfire in the distance. The officer stopped in front of a long hut. "Inside you'll find others like you," he said. "Some Canadian, many British, a handful American, all here for one purpose: to learn to disappear, deceive, and survive." The officer paused before adding, "What we teach you here could break you. But if it does not, you will become something the enemy will fear." Inside the hut, a dozen recruits sat on wooden bunks. Some looked confident, others nervous, but all carried the same quiet tension. A wiry French-Canadian named André Duchamp offered Jack a nod. "You look like a school teacher," André said. Jack managed a small laugh. "I used to be." André grinned. "Good. Teachers make excellent spies. You already know how to watch a room." Their first days were a storm of physical trials. Recruits ran through obstacle courses before dawn, crawled through mud under live fire, and learned to handle explosives so sensitive they could detonate from the warmth of a hand. Instructors shouted corrections, but never encouragement. Camp X had no patience for weakness. One morning, after an especially brutal drill, Jack collapsed against the wall of a shed. His legs shook from exhaustion. A shadow fell over him. It was Lieutenant Colonel Bill Brooker, one of the most feared instructors. He crouched down. "You're not here because you're strong," Brooker said. "You're here because you can think under pressure. Muscle fails, nerves fail. But if your mind holds steady, you survive. Stand up and get back on the line." Jack forced himself upright. Pain lit his limbs like fire, yet he returned to the training field. Brooker's words echoed in his mind. Strength mattered, but the real tests were still to come. Within a week, the recruits were introduced to the silent arts. They practiced lockpicking in dark rooms, guided only by the feel of metal against metal. They learned to forge documents, eavesdrop without being noticed, and kill quickly using nothing more than a pen, a belt, or bare hands. An instructor named Eva, a stern woman rumored to have escaped occupied Poland, demonstrated techniques with chilling precision. She grabbed Andrei by the arm, twisted, and brought him to the ground before he realized what had happened. "If an enemy gets this close," she said, "you have already made a mistake. But you can still survive if you act without hesitation." Jack trained with Eva for hours, and her lessons sank deep. She taught him how to walk without sound, how to avoid leaving tracks, how to spot the smallest sign of surveillance. Once she placed a newspaper on a table and instructed him to walk across the room without disturbing the slightest fold of paper. It took Jack nearly a week before he succeeded. Eva offered him the faintest smile. "Good. You are beginning to understand." The recruits also practiced interrogation resistance. They were blindfolded, bound, and subjected to cold, hunger, and the constant pressure of questions they were forbidden to answer. Jack discovered he could endure more than he expected. He learned to slow his breathing, to steady his thoughts, to picture the lakes and forests of home whenever panic threatened. During one session, Andrei whispered from the darkness, "Jack, you still alive?" Jack whispered back, "Barely." A guard kicked the door and shouted for silence, but the brief exchange reminded Jack he wasn't alone. Evenings were no respite. Indoors, they studied European rail systems, German uniforms, foreign dialects, and map reading, so detailed that one misinterpreted line could mean death. They practiced memorizing new identities until their real names felt unfamiliar. Jack became used to rehearsing cover stories until they rolled off his tongue with the ease of truth. He learned to dye his hair, alter his posture, and mimic local accents. The instructors drilled it into them that the smallest slip could expose an entire network. The darker lessons came later. One foggy night, the recruits were marched into the woods and told to stalk one another. Jack moved through the undergrowth, senses sharp. A twig snapped behind him. He spun, dropping low, and tackled the silhouette charging toward him. They rolled through the wet leaves until Jack pinned his opponent. It was Andrei. Both men breathed hard. Andrei gave a quiet laugh. "Better you than some German patrol," he whispered. Jack pulled him up, and they returned to camp together beneath the cover of trees. Despite the harsh conditions, bonds formed quickly. In the mess hall, the recruits shared stories of home, though never too many. Personal history was a luxury spies could not afford. Jack learned that Andrei had left behind a brother fighting with the Free French. Another recruit, Sarah Whitman, had been a university linguist fluent in German and Dutch. She was calm and composed, but her eyes carried a shadow that suggested she had witnessed tragedy long before arriving at Camp X. Together they trained, failed, improved, and hardened. Weeks turned into months. Each morning, the recruits awoke wondering who might disappear next. Sometimes a bunk sat empty at dawn, the person reassigned or dismissed without explanation. It was whispered that those who failed quietly returned to civilian life with stories they were forbidden to tell. Others were rumored to have been sent into action prematurely. No one asked questions. Curiosity was dangerous. As winter deepened, Jack's skills sharpened. He could break down and reassemble a Sten gun in the dark. He could slip past a guard post without disturbing the snow. He could disarm a man twice his size using techniques Eva drilled into him until his muscles moved from instinct alone. The transformation was startling. He still looked like the soft-spoken schoolteacher he once was, but now he carried a calm certainty that surprised even him. One frigid evening, after a grueling navigation exercise, Jack stood alone at the edge of the lake. Ice drifted near the shore, and the moon shone faintly through the clouds. Sarah approached quietly, her breath forming small clouds. "Reynolds visited today," she said. Jack turned to her. "Recruitment Officer Reynolds?" She nodded. "He brought new orders. They're choosing the first group for deployment." Jack felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "Do you think they'll pick us?" he asked. Sarah looked out over the dark water. "They will pick whoever they think can survive. Whether that's us or someone else. We'll know soon." The next morning, the recruits assembled in the main hall. Instructors stood at the front, their expressions stern but unreadable. Reynolds entered, carrying a folder of papers. The room fell silent. He began reading names. One by one, recruits stepped forward. Some showed pride, others fear, but all understood what the selection meant. When Reynolds called Jack McLeod, Jack felt his heart pound. He stepped out of line, sensing the eyes of the room upon him. Sarah's name followed soon after, then Andre's. The three exchanged brief glances, each recognizing what lay ahead. Reynolds closed the folder and addressed them. "You have been chosen because you demonstrated skill, resolve, and discretion. From this point forward, you are no longer trainees. You are field operatives of the Allied Intelligence Network. Your missions will be unacknowledged. Your successes silent. Your failures fatal. Prepare to depart within 48 hours. Jack felt a weight settle on him, heavier than exhaustion or fear. He had become exactly what Camp X intended him to be. A ghost in the war. A shadow among enemies. A weapon forged in silence. As the recruits dispersed, Andre clasped Jack's shoulder. "Well, my friend," he said, "it seems our real training begins now." Jack nodded. The corridors around them hummed with the activity of a place preparing to send its best into danger. The air felt charged, as if the camp itself recognized the shift. Jack walked back toward his barracks, snow crunching beneath his boots. He realized that the next time he stepped beyond the barbed wire fences, he would not be returning to the life he once knew. Camp X had stripped away the ordinary man he had been and shaped something new in his place. Whatever waited across the Atlantic, he was no longer afraid. Behind him, the wind swept across the frozen fields, carrying with it the faint sounds of gunfire and shouted orders. Far ahead lay the ports, the convoys, and the occupied lands where his team would be dropped in darkness. Their journey was only beginning. The cargo plane cut through the night like a steel ghost, its engines barely audible above the roar of the wind. The men and women inside sat in silence, faces dimly lit by the red cabin light. Jack McLeod tightened the straps of his parachute and tried to steady his breathing. Across from him, Andre Duchamp checked the safety on his Sten gun for the third time. Sarah Whitman sat between them, reviewing the small folded map she had memorized days ago. The map itself would be burned the moment they landed. In their line of work, paper could kill. The jumpmaster raised 2 fingers. 10 minutes. Jack looked at his team. They were no longer recruits of Camp X. They were operatives of the Special Operations Executive, trained to slip behind enemy lines, raise resistance networks, and sabotage German operations in the deep shadows of occupied France. Their mission file was simple in words, but overwhelming in weight. Link up with a local resistance cell. Disrupt a supply corridor feeding German armor in Normandy. Survive long enough to make a difference. The jumpmaster shouted over the engines. Masks on. Prepare for drop. Cold air blasted into the cabin as the hatch opened. The black sky stretched below them, a void broken only by the faint glow of small French villages buried in occupation and fear. Jack felt Andre nudge his arm. Time to earn our keep, Andre said with a grin that failed to hide his nerves. One by one, they stepped into the night. The air slammed against Jack's body as he fell, his stomach rising into his throat. The world spun, wind tearing at his clothes. He counted seconds and pulled the cord. The chute snapped open with a violent jolt. Jack steadied himself and scanned the darkness. Andre's chute unfolded to his right, Sarah's slightly below. Far beneath them, a field stretched like a dark sea. They landed softly in tall grass. Jack unhooked his chute, pulled it into a tight bundle, and buried it beneath the earth. The night hummed with insects and the distant sound of a German truck on the road. Every sense felt sharp. Every movement felt watched. A tall figure emerged from a cluster of trees and gave the signal. 2 taps on the forearm, 1 on the shoulder. The code. Jack responded. The figure lowered his scarf, revealing a gaunt Frenchman with dark eyes. I am Léon, he whispered. Welcome to France. Move quickly. We cannot stay in the open. They followed Léon through winding hedgerows until they reached a small barn at the edge of a vineyard. Inside, a single lantern illuminated the rough wooden walls. A woman waited there, loading ammunition into a pistol. Her hair was tied back with a faded red ribbon. She introduced herself as Mireille, co-leader of the resistance cell they were joining. We are grateful for your arrival, she said. The Germans have increased patrols. They suspect something is coming, though they do not yet know what. We must strike before they tighten the net. Jack, Andre, and Sarah exchanged glances. This was the reality of their work. Fear mixed with urgency. Failure meant torture or execution not only for them, but for anyone who aided them. Mireille. He opened a small crate filled with explosives. Tomorrow night we sabotage a fuel depot near Saint-Lô, she explained. It supplies tanks headed toward the northern front. If we destroy it, the Germans will struggle to reinforce their lines for weeks. She looked at Jack. You are demolition experts, yes? Jack nodded. We trained for this. Before dawn, they rested briefly in a hayloft. Jack did not sleep. He listened to the creaking rafters and the distant rumble of German vehicles moving along the highway. Sarah sat near the window, observing the countryside with quiet intensity. Camp X felt tough, she whispered. But this feels different. The silence is sharper. Jack nodded. The stakes are real now. That night, the mission began. The team moved across the dark fields, shadows against shadows. German sentries patrolled near the depot's perimeter. A spotlight swept rhythmically over the area. Jack motioned for Sarah to take position near the north fence. Andre circled to the west, Léon and Mireille staying close enough to support but far enough to remain unseen. Jack crawled along a drainage ditch until he reached the depot wall. The smell of fuel was strong, thick in his throat. He removed a small set of wire cutters and worked silently. Once inside, he crouched beside a row of drums. He placed the charges carefully, his hand steady. Every sound seemed magnified. The clicking metal of the detonator, the scrape of gravel beneath his boots, the faint muttering of German soldiers smoking behind a truck. Suddenly, a beam of light swept dangerously close. Jack froze. A guard turned the corner, boots crunching slowly. Jack's heart hammered. The guard stopped meters from him, sniffed the air, and muttered to himself. Then he turned away. Jack exhaled and finished planting the last charge. He gave the signal with a faint whistle. Andre appeared from the shadows like a wraith, offering cover as Jack slipped back through the fence. Sarah rejoined them moments later, face pale but focused. They regrouped with Mireille and Léon and retreated into the vineyards. Minutes later, an explosion ripped through the night. Flames leapt into the sky, illuminating the distant silhouettes of running German soldiers. Jack felt the shockwave vibrate through his ribs. Mireille touched his arm. "That will slow them," she said. "But we must move. They will search every house and barn by dawn." The resistance cell guided them to a safe house outside a small village. It belonged to a widow named Isabel, whose husband had died in a German labor camp. Her hands trembled as she welcomed them, yet she spoke with firm resolve. "If my home can help push them back, then it will not go to waste," she said. For days, Jack and his team rotated through a cycle of planning, hiding, and striking. They blew rail lines, intercepted German dispatches, and built networks with local fighters who moved through the countryside with the ease of foxes. Jack saw courage in places he did not expect. From teenagers delivering hidden messages on bicycles to farmers who quietly redirected cattle to block roads used by German convoys. One evening, as they gathered around a small table to review intelligence, Andre leaned close to Jack. "Do you ever think about home?" he asked. Jack shook his head slowly. "I try not to. It feels too far away. Too peaceful." Andre nodded. "Same for me. I write letters to my brother in my head, never on paper. But the words help." Jack smiled faintly. "Maybe I'll try that." Not every operation went smoothly. During a raid on a telegraph station, a misstep nearly cost them everything. Sarah had scaled the wall with ease, but a guard changed his patrol early, spotting her silhouette. Shots rang out. Jack dragged Sarah behind a stone wall as Andre fired back. Léon tackled the guard from behind, silencing him. The mission continued, but the close call shook them all. Later, as Sarah cleaned a graze wound on her arm, she murmured, "We got careless." Jack placed a hand on her shoulder. "We learned. That's why we're still alive." But danger moved closer each day. German intelligence increased its presence in the region. The Gestapo arrived in the nearby town of Carentan. Their interrogations were ruthless, and several resistance members were captured in rapid succession. Mireille kept her composure, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. "Someone is informing on us," she said. "We must assume the enemy knows our faces." A storm washed over France the night their world changed. Rain hammered the rooftops of Isabel's house. Wind rattled the shutters. Jack, Andre, and Sarah studied maps by candlelight, while Léon stood watch at the window. Then a knock sounded at the back door. Léon motioned for silence. Jack drew his pistol. The knock repeated, softer this time. Mireille stepped forward, whispering, "It could be one of ours?" Or a trap. She opened the door a crack. A young boy stumbled in, soaked to the bone, eyes wide with terror. He gasped for breath and pointed toward the road. "They're coming," he whispered. "The Germans know. They're searching house by house." Jack felt a surge of dread. They had minutes at most. Sarah grabbed the radios, maps, and coded messages, stuffing them into a satchel. Andre checked the rear exit. "2 trucks," he said urgently, "and soldiers spread out on foot." Isabel's hands shook as she tried to speak. Jack touched her arm. "We will not let them find you. Hide in the cellar. Go now." The team fled into the storm, slipping through gardens and narrow alleys as German voices grew louder behind them. Thunder rolled across the sky. Jack tasted mud on his tongue as he crawled beneath a fence. Sarah nearly slipped, but Jack caught her wrist and pulled her forward. They didn't stop until they reached the forest beyond the village. From a hilltop, Jack watched German trucks surround Isabel's home. Soldiers forced the doors open, shouting orders. He clenched his fists. The rain masked most of his expression, but Sarah saw enough to place a hand on his shoulder. "She knew the risk," she said softly. "We all do." Mireille stepped beside them, panting from the run. "The Germans are tightening control," she said, "but the Allies are preparing for something large. We must deliver the next transmission. Without it, they will strike blind." Jack nodded. The stakes had risen again. Behind him, German searchlights swept through the storm like white claws slicing the darkness. Ahead lay a mission more dangerous than any they had faced so far. Every step from here forward would carry them deeper into the enemy's tightening grip. And failure was no longer an option. Their fight in the shadows was only becoming darker. Dawn broke over the French countryside with a muted gray light, the kind that seemed to dull every color and quiet every sound. Jack McLeod crouched beneath a hedgerow, his clothes damp from the night storm, his breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. The forest around him rustled faintly as Andre, Sarah, Léon, and Mireille reassembled after hours spent evading German patrols. Their faces looked drawn, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, yet no one spoke of rest. They all knew what lay ahead. The Allies were preparing for the greatest gamble of the war, and their small team carried a piece of information crucial to its success. Mireille spread a map across the ground, anchoring it with stones. "Our network confirmed a major German armored division is shifting closer to the coast," she said. "If the Allies don't know in time, they'll land into a death trap." Sarah leaned forward, wiping rain from her forehead as she studied the markings. "We have the details. We just need to get them out." Jack nodded. "The radio station at the abandoned mill. If we reach it before nightfall, we can transmit everything to London." The plan sounded simple, but paths that had been safe weeks earlier were now crawling with German patrols. The Gestapo's arrival had turned every village into a maze of suspicion. Roadblocks sprang up overnight. Locals whispered of brutal interrogations and disappeared neighbors. Even the resistance felt the pressure. Some spoke of going underground entirely. Others wondered aloud if the Allied landings would come soon enough to save them. Their group set out before sunrise, balancing speed with caution. They moved through woodlands, avoiding open roads, stopping only when distant engines or voices reached their ears. Twice they froze as columns of German trucks passed so close they could smell the exhaust fumes. At one point, Andre whispered, "If the Allies are coming, they'd better hurry." By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley. Below lay the remains of an old watermill, half collapsed but shielded by thick trees. The resistance had hidden a portable transmitter inside weeks earlier. It was one of the last functioning sets in the region. Leon raised his binoculars. 2 patrols nearby, he said quietly. But they're moving away. If we hurry, we can get inside. Jack waited, listening to the forest. Birdsong returned in hesitant bursts. No engines, no voices. Move, he ordered. Inside the mill, Sarah knelt beside the transmitter and began assembling its pieces. The machine was small but temperamental, requiring steady hands and nerves of steel. Andre stood watch near the door, Sten gun ready. Mireille and Leon positioned themselves at the windows, scanning the forest for movement. Jack unfolded the coded message they had gathered from the resistance network. German armor movements, artillery placements, troop reinforcements, all written in a cipher he now understood better than his own handwriting. He passed the sheet to Sarah. "Take your time," he said. "But not too much." Sarah offered a tired smile. "Understood." The transmitter crackled to life. Sarah tapped out the first sequence, sending the coded report into the static-filled ether. Jack imagined the signal leaping across Europe, reaching British intercept stations, racing through wires to a room in London where analysts would pounce on it like wolves. With luck, someone would understand how urgent the message was. But luck was something they rarely enjoyed for long. A sharp whistle echoed outside the mill. Leon's head snapped up. "Dogs," he whispered. "Coming fast." Mireille's face tightened. "They found our trail." Jack sprang to the doorway. Andre cursed under his breath. From the tree line, German soldiers emerged at a sprint, rifles ready, dogs straining at their leashes. They had minutes, maybe less. "Sarah, finish it," Jack said. "No matter what." She didn't hesitate. Her fingers moved faster across the keys, tapping furiously. Andre fired the first burst, dropping 2 soldiers. Jack grabbed his pistol and took the opposite window, returning fire as the Germans fanned out across the clearing. The dogs barked wildly, pulling their handlers forward. The air filled with splinters as bullets tore into the mill's rotting wood. "Transmission complete," Sarah shouted. "I'm shutting it down." "No time," Jack said. "Grab what you can. We're leaving." They bolted out the rear of the mill, racing through the trees as bullets snapped past them. Andre stayed close behind Jack, firing short bursts to slow the pursuit. Leon guided them toward a ravine hidden by dense foliage. The Germans followed relentlessly, shouting commands, their dogs drawing ever closer. When they reached the ravine, Mireille pointed to a narrow footbridge made of rotted planks stretched across a steep drop. "One at a time," she said. "Careful." Jack went first, testing each plank. The wood creaked dangerously. Halfway across, he heard Andre shout behind him. "They're almost on us." Jack reached the far side and turned to cover the others. Sarah crossed next, nearly slipping when a plank cracked beneath her. Jack grabbed her arm and pulled her to safety. Mireille followed. Then Leon. Andre stepped onto the bridge last. A gunshot rang out. Andre staggered. Jack felt his stomach twist. "Andre, move!" Andre forced himself forward, gripping the ropes. He made it halfway before a second shot struck the bridge. The wood splintered. The central plank collapsed. Andre lunged forward, grabbing the rope with both hands as the bridge fell away beneath him. "Hold on!" Jack shouted, dropping to his knees and extending his arm. Andre's fingers reached toward him, shaking with effort. "Jack," he gasped. "Go! You have to go." Jack leaned farther, stretching so far he felt the muscles in his shoulder tear. "Grab my hand," he said. "I'm not leaving you." For a moment, their hands brushed. Then a burst of gunfire forced Jack back behind a rock. When he turned again, Andre had lost his grip. He fell into the ravine, disappearing into a rush of white water far below. "No," Jack whispered, his voice cracking. Sarah grabbed his arm. "We have to leave. Now." He stared at the ravine another second, fighting the impulse to run after his friend. But the sound of approaching soldiers made the decision for him. He stood, jaw clenched. "Move." They escaped deeper into the forest, following a route Leon knew well. None of them spoke. Andre's absence felt like a physical weight dragging at their steps. By nightfall, they reached a hidden cave used by resistance scouts. Jack collapsed against the wall, burying his face in his hands. "Mireille's at Dad's son." Mireille sat beside him quietly. "He saved us," she said. "He knew what it meant." Jack nodded, though the truth offered little comfort. Sarah placed the satchel of documents in his lap. "The transmission went through," she said. "London will act. Andre didn't die for nothing." The next days blurred into a fog of exhaustion and grief. With German patrols flooding the region, the group split up, hoping smaller movements would go unnoticed. Mireille, Kali, and Leon promised to escort them to separate extraction points. "If all goes well," Leon said, "you will see England within a week." But the war had taught them that well was a rare thing. Jack and Sarah traveled with Leon through remote farmland, avoiding villages entirely. Twice they hid in ditches as German columns passed, once so close that Jack could hear the clatter of boots on the metal truck beds. Hunger gnawed at them. Sleep came only in brief, uneasy fragments. Still, they pressed on. On the fifth night, they reached a farmhouse near a river. A British submarine was scheduled to collect operatives from the far bank before dawn. Leon checked his watch. "We wait here," he said. "No lights, no noise." Inside the farmhouse, Jack sat at a wooden table, staring at the candleless darkness. Sarah leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "When we return," she said softly, "what will we tell them about Andre?" Jack shook his head. "Everything. But they won't be able to write any of it down. His name will disappear into a file no one will see for decades." "That's what we signed up for," she whispered. "Yes," Jack said, "but knowing it doesn't make it easier." Near dawn, Leon signaled them to move. They crossed the field toward the river, moving swiftly and silently. The moon glowed faintly through the mist. A single flashlight blinked from the far bank. The extraction signal. Then a shot tore through the quiet. Leon spun and fell without a sound. Jack and Sarah dropped behind a fallen tree as German voices erupted behind them. A patrol had tracked them, perhaps for hours. Flares lit the sky. The field erupted in shouts and gunfire. Jack fired back, desperately trying to cover Sarah's retreat. She shouted his name, but he shook his head. "Get to the water," he said. "Go." She hesitated only a second before sprinting toward the river. Jack turned and fired again. The Germans closed in. He ran toward the opposite side of the field, drawing them away from the extraction point. Bullets ripped through the grass around him. He vaulted a fence, dashed behind a stone wall, and vanished into the woods. Sarah reached the river bank as the submarine crew pulled her onto a small raft. She searched the fields, eyes scanning frantically for movement. but the gunfire had faded. The forest swallowed every sound. The raft pushed off into the dark. Jack McLeod did not appear. When Sarah reached England, she filed her report. Officials listened, took notes, and thanked her for her service. But when she asked about Jack and Andre, they told her only what she already feared. There was no record of either man being captured. No reports of bodies found. No sightings. Nothing. They had simply disappeared into the war. Years later, long after the guns fell silent, Sarah stood at the memorial wall honoring fallen SOE agents. She traced her fingers over 2 engraved words, unknown operative. Her throat tightened, knowing one of those names should have been Andre's. Another should have been Jack's. They had fought behind enemy lines with courage few would ever understand. Their missions saved lives, shifted battles, and shaped the war's outcome. But they would never be celebrated. Their deeds remained classified, their sacrifices hidden beneath layers of silence. That was the cost of the shadows. And it was the legacy they left behind, a legacy carried quietly by those who survived and remembered the names the world never would.